Good afternoon and welcome to the Brazos River Authority's Brown Bag on the Brazos. I'm Judy Pierce, the Public Information Officer for the Brazos River Authority and your host for today's virtual town hall meeting. We have some interesting program for you today. For all you fishermen out there, we'll be talking with Tiffany Malzahn about an ongoing program to increase fish habitat at the BRA system reservoirs. Then we'll talk a bit about recent gate releases from Possum Kingdom Lake and Lake Granbury with Senior Water Resources Planner Peyton Lysenby, and how our hydrologists determine how these releases from the reservoirs are done. And then we'll hear a bit about what to expect from spring and summer weather and what that might mean for our water supply and lake levels with lead hydrologist Chris Higgins. And as always, we'll try to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so before we jump in, let's talk a little housekeeping. Part of the purpose of our being here today is to allow you to ask questions of the BRA. So at any time during our presentation today, you can ask a question by typing it into the chat function. You'll find that icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. But if we don't get to your question, we'll be happy to answer it if you'd like to send us an email at information@brazos.org, and we will respond to you in writing. So it's my pleasure to welcome back Tiffany Malzahn, our Chief Environmental Officer, to talk a little bit about an ongoing program designed to improve fishing at the reservoirs within the BRA system, which includes both BRA reservoirs and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reservoirs. So welcome, Tiff. So at our last board meeting, our board of directors voted to extend funding for the Fisheries Habitat Improvement Program. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's a program we started in 2016 in partnership with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And coming out of the 2011 drought, we learned some really important things, is that at low water levels on our reservoirs, which on some of them we saw, at least for the first time in my career, at some critically low levels, an absence of habitat necessary to sustain a fishery within a reservoir. So we concocted this program to begin creating artificial habitat in deeper waters of the reservoirs to hopefully help us mitigate future reservoir impacts during drought, and to provide some basic fundamental habitat needs for fish once if we ever do see those extreme low water levels again. And here's an example of like what we saw. This is Lake Proctor, and the picture on the left is the top of conservation pool when the reservoir is full. Then the middle one is where we mapped the loss of critical habitat. So you see like this little area, this is the main primary habitat that supports fisheries, nurseries, provides cover from predation, things like that. In 2011, not only had we lost the habitat, the ideal habitat, we had seen the reservoir lake levels come all the way down, leaving these deep waters just don't have much structure for the fish.
So what happens is as the water level goes down, all of the habitat dies away?
Or it's essentially stranded above the water line. So it's out there. It'll die out. Some of it'll die off. Some of it might survive. There's usually enough moisture in the soil for vegetation to continue on for some time. But it's not accessible to the fish because there's no water on it.
Right. That's right. Right, go to the next one. Okay.
Here's some examples of different artificial habitat structures. Every reservoir supports a different fishery, so we have to use a different strategy for each reservoir to support the types of fish that it is known for. So we generally leave this up to the Texas Parks and Wildlife in-stream fisheries biologists, because they're the ones who primarily are responsible for maintaining the fisheries on each lake. They do the stocking, they do a lot of the assessments as far as how the fishery's doing. But we'll work with them to help fund and get these different strategies. And there's more than this. This is just some examples of strategies that they've used in different reservoirs out in each reservoir.
Okay, are those specific to a certain type of fish population or?
Yes, and that's kind of how they'll pick, and some of them just by their names, you can tell a catfish spawning box. So those will technically go, we've put them in Lake Aquila, we've put them in Lake Proctor, some in Lake Limestone for the reservoirs that are known for strong catfish populations. Crappie condos are, out in, I know we've put quite a few of those out in Lake Granbury. So it does, some of the structures are more tuned for certain types of fish than others. The gravel beds will help a lot of the stone rollers and some of the smaller fish that maybe aren't game fish that fishermen and recreationalists are interested in, but it's the base of the food chain. So it'll help support some of the minnows and things like that. And then others, the medusas, the Georges, the, concrete structures, it's more just kind of generic reef that's beneficial to most fish.
Great.
And this is just a picture of some of the BRA staff and Parks and Wildlife staff on Lake Granbury, placing some of the structures out off one of the fishing piers on the reservoir too.
Okay, so these are all mapped as to where the locations are.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct. And that map is available on our website.
Okay.
So if you're interested, you can go to the site that was listed, and then you have the option here, roll down. You can see the dots indicate the lakes where we've done things. Some have had more than others, but you can certainly zoom in and then see the exact location. So when you're planning your next fishing trip, if you want to go look, I know we've gotten a lot of feedback from fishermen on Lake Limestone that they love it. They use this all the time, and it's given them good success. So what the board approved is basically 5 more years of us partnering with Parks and Wildlife to do deep water habitat improvements on our reservoirs.
Good deal. Great. Okay, so if somebody wants to get to this map, they need to come to our website, which is brazos.org. And if they just type in a slash mark there and put in habitat, they'd be able to find that interactive map to be able to see exactly where all of those things are placed on our reservoirs. Okay. Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for the program, and thanks for taking the time to come talk to us. We appreciate it, and we hope you'll be back another time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Right. For you parents and grandparents out there, summertime can be like a great amount of fun, but it's also kind of scary to get those little ones out around the water. So we'd like to help you out a bit by providing your littles with some great water safety information in the form of a coloring book. These books will help your kids learn how to be careful and responsible around water, and we'd be happy to send you some of the coloring books. If you'd like to send us an email at information@brazos.org, include your name and postal address, and let us know how many coloring books you'd like to have for the summer, and we'll send those out to you. All right, today we're welcoming back Peyton Lysenby, a BRA Senior Water Resources Planner. He's going to talk a little bit about the recent water releases we've had from both Possum Kingdom Lake and Lake Granbury. We've had a lot of water coming and going through both of those reservoirs, and at the same time, we've had a lot of people asking questions about how do you determine when to open the gates and how the gates are opened, and how do you open, what is the timing in between the two. So if you can tell us a little bit about that, we'd appreciate it. But before we get started, we're big on acronyms here. And when we put out information on our social media pages, we talk about releasing at a certain cubic feet per second, as well as acre feet. So could you tell us a little bit about what those are, so people can understand before we start talking about how much we release?
Yeah, sure. So acre foot and cubic feet per second, these are both common metrics we use to communicate volume and rate, which are key in understanding the movement of water. So an acre foot is a unit of volume, right? Not unlike a gallon. It's just much bigger. So the diagram here is trying to equate this to something that's easy to think about, easy for you to picture. The active area of a football playing field, exclusive of the end zones, is about equivalent to an acre. So 272 feet long, about 160 feet wide. If you filled that space up 1 foot deep with water, that is an acre foot, that volume.
Okay.
And the equivalent volume in gallons is about 325,000 gallons of water in that 1 acre foot, or about 16 standard size swimming pools. So an acre foot in and of itself, even if you just have 1 acre foot, it's actually a lot of water, at least on at a personal scale. So that's volume. With rate, we want to understand how fast that volume is moving. So a cubic foot per second is a volume, a cubic foot in this case, moving at a distance over time. Moving over time. So a cubic foot per second is 1 cubic foot of water, about equivalent to your standard, I guess, 16-inch diameter beach ball, moving every second. So every second, 1 cubic foot would go by. Which doesn't sound like a lot. Some of our larger releases, though, are, you can be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of cubic feet every second.
So if someone
which
wanted
adds
to imagine 9,500 beach balls
Yes.
per second passing by you
Right.
in the river,
That's right.
a lot of water.
That would be a good indication of it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's key to understand those terms when we talk about how we get an idea of the movement of water in the basin. So timing and magnitude, right? It's all about when the water arrives and how much water is arriving. We use a network of USGS gauge stations. We partner with the USGS to have these installed and to maintain them. And they are located throughout the basin. I know we're talking about PK and Granbury today. So we're west of Fort Worth, west and southwest of Fort Worth. You'll notice we have gauges located on the rivers, so the little black dots that are on the lines, and then we have gauges on the lakes. So the gauges on the rivers tell us cubic feet per second. They give us, we call that discharge or stream flow, right? What's that volume of water moving over time? So that tells us how much is on the way or how much is leaving.
Okay.
The gauges on the lake tell us lake elevation, right? So as you can imagine, if you have a lake elevation that is increasing over time, you're filling that reservoir. There must be a rate of water being delivered to that reservoir so that you're filling it and its storage is increasing. We look at these two metrics, like lake elevation and stream flow, to help us determine what we need to do with our reservoir releases in order to be able to maintain safe reservoir levels and be able to pass what's coming into the reservoir or the inflows in a safe manner to take care of our infrastructure. And I've highlighted a couple here that are special, right? So the South Bend gauge, that's number 1 here, and the Dennis gauge. These are special because not only can these gauges tell us what is happening and what has happened, these gauges can tell us what is expected to happen. So these are official River Forecast Center forecast points. So the West Gulf River Forecast Center, associated with the National Weather Service, they will run models whenever we have these big rainfall events that'll try and determine how much of that rain's going to run off and end up in the river, and then how high the river's going to get, how much discharge the river's going to have in the future over, maybe the next 2 or 3 days. That helps us a lot because we know that, for example, at South Bend, it takes about a day. I know it doesn't look like it should take that long, but it takes about a day for the water at this gauge here to arrive for us to notice a lake level change down here at the dam.
Okay.
And so if we have an idea like, okay, over the next 3 days, South Bend's going to come up to maybe 10,000 cubic feet per second, we know, okay, maybe we're thinking gate release might be necessary over the next couple of days, right? So it helps us plan. Now, again, these forecast points aren't all over the place. There's just a couple of them, but they're crucial to help us get a good idea of what to expect over time. Yes. Another key thing to note here is, especially for our planning about how we orchestrate our releases, is BRA reservoirs don't have flood control storage space. We do not have space in our reservoirs dedicated to flood control. Of course, during dry times when the reservoirs are low, the reservoirs naturally, when we have an inflow event, have to fill up before we'll start releasing. So there's an element to flood control in that regard. But when they're full, there's no extra room in there for us to stack any water on top of it. So general, what goes in must come out.
Okay,
Right.
so what we're looking at in the picture is actually, that's the Possum Kingdom Lake Dam or
Mhm.
Shepherd Dam. And the water is literally right at the top of that
That's
gate.
right. So for Possum Kingdom, the reservoir itself, we operate it, the top of the gates, the top of those 9 bear trap gates at PK are at elevation 1,000, right? A nice round number. Now, naturally, we don't want to keep the water level right at the top of the gate. So that gives us no room to wiggle. And also you can have wave action and spillage over the top. So we operate the level at a lower elevation, elevation 999. That's what we consider to be full. And at that elevation, the lake holds over 500,000 acre feet of water. But when we have more water coming in on top of that, we have to operate those bear trap gates, especially for large events, in order to maintain a safe reservoir level. And that's, again, directly related to our infrastructure. The infrastructure there, the dam and its components, are all designed to operate at certain elevation levels. And so we have to maintain those elevations with our gate operations, so that everything stays safe. Importantly, when we do have a gate operation, right, we watch the lake level change over time. Yeah, especially at PK, when you drop a gate, it has a very immediate reaction to the lake level depending on the water coming in. And so you're going to see changes in the lake level. It may go down. If it continues to go up, there may be another gate that has to be dropped, right? So it's not just a one and done type deal. When we are managing the lake levels, it's a very dynamic, it's an active process. We're constantly getting feedback from the lake level gauges to tell us how well our release is doing. Oftentimes it's raining while we're doing this, right? So the inflows are changing while the releases are being made. And we utilize that system of gauges to keep us informed throughout the whole process.
Okay. All right, let's learn a little bit about how the gates operate at Morris Shepherd.
At Morris Shepherd Dam, we have 3 ways of releasing water. We have our 3 low flow gates, which release about 100 cubic feet per second. We also have our 78-inch and 42-inch ring jet valves. And then we have our 9 bear trap or roof weir style spillway gates, and each of those release about 9,000 cubic feet per second. We're always releasing some amount of water, either through the low flows, the ring jet valves, or our spillway gates. This is a scaled model of one of our bear trap or roof weir gates. When we're expecting to make a gate release, we fill this chamber underneath here. The uplift pressure from that water causes the upstream and downstream leaves to float. Whenever that happens, you get some water that comes over the downstream leaf and down the spillway. People see that and think that we're making a release, and that's not necessarily the case. That's just in preparation for a release. Once we are at a floating status, we'll send our folks down on top of the dam. They'll harness up, tether off, and they walk across the top of the gate and unlock those locking bars. At that point, the gate is in the floated and unlocked status. Whenever we're ready to make that release, we drain the water out from the gate chamber. The gate will collapse down on top of itself, allowing the water from the lake to flow over the gate, down the spillway, and through the flip bucket and down the river. The process to operate one of our spillway gates is 2 hours.
Okay. That's really informative video. It gives you an idea of how this older dam works in comparison to others.
And important to note there, as you saw, we have some prep at PK that we have to do when we know we have an event coming, right? So if we have a forecast, a rainfall forecast, a river forecast at perhaps the South Bend Point, we can prep those gates. We can float them, right? Unlock them and float them so that when it comes time, when the inflows do arrive and we actually have to actively manage the lake level, we can do that a bit more efficiently than having to unlock and then float and then drop the gate all in one sequence. So those forecasts are very helpful for us to be able to prep our infrastructure to better handle the event as it happens.
Okay.
Of course, everything we release from PK ends up headed downstream, right?
Right.
So
So how long does it take when you open the gate from Possum Kingdom Lake to actually start moving downstream and get to Lake Granbury?
yeah, so one gate release from PK generally will show up at Granbury in 36 to 40 hours. And there's some range there. It depends on how dry it was beforehand, right? So usually the first big event of the year It takes a little longer, right? Because the channel's drier, some of the water is absorbed in the banks in the bed. Once we've been in this for a while, like we are now, we've already had, a lot of releases coming the past month and a half or so. It goes a little faster, right? It's more toward the 36-hour end of it.
Okay.
And then if you have multiple gates, right? So if you drop one gate and it plows forward down toward Granbury, if we do have to drop another gate during a large event, that gate actually tends to go a little bit faster because it had the first gate in front of it plowing the road, right? So it's not uncommon for, by the time it gets to Granbury, that second gate to actually catch up with the first gate.
Right.
And it all kind of look like one flood wave as it gets down there. But it's
So
quite a distance.
when you open a gate, so it's 112 miles, so it's going to take
Yeah.
at least a couple of days to get there. Do you immediately start opening gates at Lake Granbury to prepare for that?
Yeah, so that's another classic "it depends" answer. I know it doesn't look like it ought to be as far as it is, but as the crow flies, they're not terribly far apart. But remember, the water doesn't follow that path, right? So river miles, it's 112. And then once it actually gets to Lake Granbury, there's another 30 or so miles to get from the top of Lake Granbury to the bottom because it's a very windy little lake. It depends on the event. It depends on the release. Oftentimes, it's not uncommon for the same rainfall event that impacts PK and creates inflows and releases there to also then subsequently affect Granbury.
Sure.
And so we do, if we know the water's on the ground, and that's key. We're not reacting to forecasted rainfall. We're not reacting to water that we don't know is there. Once we know, like we drop a gate at Possum Kingdom, once we know that water's coming, we know that we can create space for it in Granbury and it'll fill back up, right? That's the math tells us that. However, we may not have the opportunity to do that exactly how we want to if it's pouring down rain on us or if the weather's changing at Granbury. So we may be actively managing a release at Granbury while we have a release at PK coming down.
Right.
And so we'll do what we need to do to safely manage the release and the inflows at Granbury. If we can create some accommodation space at Granbury for the release at PK, we will do that beforehand so that it doesn't put us in a situation where we're actively managing the lake level here and then all of a sudden the Possum Kingdom water shows up and makes our job more complicated, right? We want to leave ourselves a little bit of wiggle room. And as I mentioned before, remember Granbury's 30 miles long, right? So when the water arrives at the top of the lake, it isn't immediately transposed to the bottom of the lake,
It's going
right?
to take time.
It's going to take some time and there's a little bit of stacking. So the top end of the lake at Granbury can fill a little bit higher than the bottom of the lake. And sometimes during big inflow events, maybe 6 inches of elevation difference between the top of Granbury and the bottom.
Really?
And so creating some accommodation space helps us manage that gap a little bit better. But again, it all depends on what the weather's doing at Granbury. If it's dry at Granbury, we're not actively managing releases, we'll go ahead and bring the lake down a ways so that we're not having to make hurried decisions, right? We've kind of made them ahead of time when we let the lake refill.
Well, we had a lot of people asking that question this most recent time that we were releasing from PK before this week. People were saying, wait, why are you bringing the lake down? It's down 2 feet now where I'm located at. Why are you doing that? So it just depends on how much you've got coming downstream. Is that the case?
That's right. And, how much were we releasing anyway? How much were we managing the lake level at Granbury anyway?
Right.
If it's not raining and perfectly dry at Granbury, we may draw the lake down in a different way than if it was pouring down rain. We may not even have the opportunity.
Okay.
The kind of rule of thumb I use is, Lake Granbury is about 8,000 surface acres, right? So, so the top foot of Granbury is about 8,000 acre feet, right? Well, a release from PK is somewhere in the, depending on the elevation of Possum Kingdom Reservoir, in the 8,000 to 9,000 range. And a little rule of thumb is if you release 8,000 CFS for a day, for a whole 24 hours, that'll get you about 16,000 acre feet, right? It's about double.
Right.
So we can kind of guesstimate, if we know the rate coming down the river, how much volume that'll result in our reservoirs, because we understand how big our reservoirs are when they're filling back up. So that's how we know we can create the accommodation space in the reservoir and then fill it back up and maintain the lake at that kind of level that it needs to be at.
So if we're in gate operations at that time, if somebody sees the lake level at Granbury coming down, they shouldn't worry that it's going to stay down. It's going to come back up as this water reaches.
It means we know we've got that much water coming down the pipe ready to fill it back in.
Right.
That's right.
Okay.
And related to that, Lake Granbury's isn't just taking in what PK delivers, right? So each of these reservoirs have their own drainage area. Of course, Possum Kingdom drains a lot more area
Right.
because it's our most upstream reservoir on the main stem. Of course, as you go west, it gets a little bit drier in the basin, but as we've all seen every spring, when it does rain out here in northwestern Texas, it's usually quite violent and it shows up very quickly. So just because you see the brown color on the map doesn't mean it never rains. It just means when it does rain, it shows up all at once. So we can get some pretty good flows from this upper basin. And of course, those are captured and passed through PK. At the same time, Granbury has its own drainage area, a smaller portion, right? Only about 2,000 square miles compared to PK's 14,000 square miles. But you can see on the map, it might rain more frequently here than it does over here, right? And so BRA, we manage quite a large river basin, and the climate is different from one end to the other. And so that's what I said before. We're doing something at Granbury to manage the lake while we're also having to pass through what's coming down from PK.
Right.
Because they each have their own areas, each have their own climates, each have their own weather that we have to deal with. The other thing that's important to note is, there's always some uncertainty when it rains about how much of that rain is going to turn into stream flow, right? If you imagine it rained, not that it would, but if it rained evenly, perfectly evenly around this entire Possum Kingdom drainage basin here, right? That would generate, if it rained an inch and it all ran off, every drop of that rainfall hit the ground and shot right to the river channel, that would be about 3/4 acre feet of water.
Wow.
Okay, coming down. Now, fortunately, that's not what happens, right? Most of this area up here is it's soil covered in soils. Of course, we have cities and roadways that are impervious and the water runs off quickly, but most of this is soil, and the soil does absorb most of that rainfall. So more common runoff is like maybe 10% of what it rains actually makes it to the river channel.
Okay.
So it makes it much more manageable. But again, if it's already rained and the soil's already wet, you may get more runoff. And so it's always, there's always a kind of adaptive management we have to have, because no one rainfall event behaves the exact same way every time. It never rains in the same place. It never runs off the same amount. And of course, it never rains evenly between Possum Kingdom and Granbury.
So that's where the gauges help us
Yes.
determine how much is
Yeah.
coming down.
It gives us an idea of like, okay, and I've been surprised a few times where it's raining up at PK and I'm thinking, okay, I bet, the South Bend gauge is going to come up and do that. And then it doesn't. And I'm like, okay, well, there must have been something else going on. So the river forecast centers help us a lot in helping us establish our expectations of what that rainfall runoff is actually going to do.
Okay.
So with Lake Granbury, Lake Granbury is a bit younger than PK, has the benefit of a bit more modern technology.
Right.
Lake Granbury's gates are operate a little differently than Possum Kingdom's. I think we'll have a video coming up to explain that. But also Lake Granbury is, it's in a different location. We operate it to different lake levels. So Lake Granbury is operated within a full range, we like to say. So elevation 692.5 feet to 692.7 feet above sea level. So it's the sweet spot.
Right.
That's where we like to keep it.
It's a matter of a few inches.
Yeah, it's not very much wiggle room, but we like to keep it in there. The top of the gates at Granbury is 693. All right, so obviously we don't want the lake level to start spilling over the top of our gates. That can actually impact our ability to open those gates if there's this weight of water crushing down on them. So we operate Granbury in a pretty tight range, but we have 16 gates at Granbury, and that can be operated electrically. So we actually have a lot more precision and speed with which we can operate Granbury's gates. So that tighter range may sound like, oh, how can you work within that margin? Well, quite effectively, because we have the infrastructure to help us do that, right? We have 16 gates that we can open in half-a-foot increments, and we can do it electronically, and they can do it quite quickly. So we can respond much faster.
Easier than Possum Kingdom.
Yeah.
Right.
And we have staff at both of these reservoirs that are experts in how to get the best out of that infrastructure, right? So with PK and with Granbury, they're very different to operate. Obviously, it's a completely different process.
Sure.
But the staff there are trained to operate that infrastructure to its highest and best capacity, right? And then to work with us, we're just saying, hey, we need this much water coming out of the dam. And they're the ones that really know how to make these things sing, right? And respond the way they need to pass that water safely through.
Well, let's see how that's done.
The gates at DeCordova Bend Dam are a newer technology. DeCordova Bend was built in 1969. We had some older style operations for raising and lowering the gates. In around 2006, we installed a system which allowed us to electronically open and close.
Both at Lake Granbury and at Lake Limestone, we have Tainer gates that are operated by using electric motors to open the gates in a relatively short amount of time, on the order of 5 to 10 minutes. At those two reservoirs, making gate changes or release changes is a pretty quick task.
The 16 Tainer gates that are on the dam were actually the very first 16 Tainer gates that were produced by the company. They are a concave shape and they open so that the water comes from the bottom of the lake, not from the top.
Okay, well, I hope that kind of described the difference between Possum Kingdom Lake and Lake Granbury a little bit for everyone. I know that we've talked a lot about gauges and where they're located, and we do have this information available to the public. And these are just a few of the ways that people can take a look at stream flow and reservoir levels. If you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner, we have something called Brazos Basin Now, which you can go to. It's open to the public. Just go there and you can take a look at the stream flow. That's that blue box on the left-hand side, or reservoir levels, or even rainfall in the area. You can chart that as well at each one of these gauges. Otherwise, if you're not interested in that much information, you can learn when we will be opening gates and when we'll be closing gates on our social media channels as well as our website. And then if you have questions, of course, there's always ask us an email question at information@brazos.org. So Peyton, again, thank you for helping us to understand a little bit. I know we currently have a gate open at Possum Kingdom
Yep.
Lake. We're releasing water at both PK and Granbury.
Yep.
And that may go for a little while still, next few days at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's more work for us, but I'm happy for a wet summer, right?
We
So
are
those are
happy.
good problems.
Fills up our hands. We
That's right.
appreciate that. Well, thank you again. We hope you'll come back and talk to us some more about this. Thank you very much. All right, so it's been kind of a wet spring, and I'm very happy to welcome back Chris Higgins, our lead hydrologist. He's going to tell us a little bit about what we can expect for the rest of the spring months and the summer as well, and what that means as far as water supply and then lake levels as well for the summer months. So what do we have, Chris? Tell us what to look forward to.
Yeah, Judy, so I'm going to start off with just kind of where we're sitting at currently, and then we'll kind of take a quick look back at where we've been, and then kind of what we can expect going forward.
Okay.
Over the next few weeks, months, and then through the remainder of the year. So this is our what we playfully refer to as our stovepipe chart. It's our current reservoir status. It shows the 11 reservoirs that make up the BRA water supply system. As you can see, it's currently sitting at 98% full here in this table in the upper right-hand corner. And these bars show kind of the relative size of the reservoirs. So you can see PK and Whitney are the two largest reservoirs, in Belton in the system. You can see kind of the smaller reservoirs, and the blue shaded area gives an indication of how full they are. So you can see that we're pretty full. The three reservoirs that are currently not completely full are in the Little River system. Those are Belton Stillhouse and Lake Georgetown. Lake Belton is gradually on the rise. We have Lake Proctor, a couple of hundred miles upstream, is currently releasing about 300 CFS. The Corps of Engineers is evacuating the flood pool, and that water will eventually make its way down to Belton. So it should keep climbing up. I don't quite think it'll completely fill up with the water that's on the ground, but maybe there's rain in the forecast, so we'll see. These boxes here, if you look at the bottom right, there's a key. Stage one is this yellow box. So anything in a yellow box are currently in stage one. So Stillhouse and Georgetown are in stage one. Somerville was in stage one a couple of weeks ago. We rescinded that drought declaration due to the lake filling up. And so you can see in the chart, Lake Somerville is currently just barely up in its flood pool. And so
So when the chart shows that it's over 100%, that means that they're storing water in their flood pool and they will be releasing that at some point.
Yeah, if it gets low enough, like currently Lake Somerville, the Corps isn't evacuating the flood pool because they're going to let demands and evap kind of take care of that. So if it were to get higher, they would initiate some level of releases out of the reservoir.
Okay.
Yeah. So moving on, this kind of takes a look back from the last couple of months. So this shows the departure from normal of precipitation. So as you can see from the graphic, the basin experienced more rainfall than what we would normally expect on average for April and May. So there are some areas, if you look around here, like in the Lake Belton drainage area, a little bit kind of over here by Lake Georgetown and Granger, and then in the Fort Bend, Brazoria counties in the lower basin, we have seen less rainfall than we would normally expect, but overall, we have seen higher than normal rainfall. One thing that really jumps out is kind of this upper part of the basin in the PK drainage area. You can see this correlates to the key. We've had greater than 8 inches of rainfall than what we would normally expect. And this really doesn't do it justice because it kind of caps off at 8 plus. These areas, some of them have seen more than 20 inches of rainfall.
Really?
So
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, we've had, and that's why we've been so busy. So kind of expanding on what Peyton was just talking about, all of the things that he was just talking about with managing our reservoirs during wet cycles like we're currently in, we've been really busy since, from about towards the latter half of April and then most all of May. And so let's go ahead and move on to this next slide. Now, this looks a little complicated just at first glance, but let me unpack it a little bit for you. This top graphic just shows the total volume of water released from Lake Granbury, Possum Kingdom, and Limestone combined. And this is just for April and May. And so you can see here's 2025. This graphic, I didn't update it within the last week or so, but now it's closer to, it's just probably a little bit over 1 million acre feet of water that we've released. And just to put that in a little bit of perspective, the total combined capacity of all 11 of our reservoirs in the system is about 2 million acre feet. So we've released about half of the total capacity of the basin over the last couple of months in 2025. And then so that this bottom graphic here is, the title here is Lower Basin Water Supply Release Summary. So the biggest driver in our water supply releases is our large lower basin customers, and they have their own water rights. And so typically they're able to divert run of the river water or the natural runoff of the Brazos River in normal to wetter years. But when you have really dry years, they have water supply contracts with the BRA, and those are kind of, for those guys, those are kind of insurance policies per se, to hedge against drier years. And so when we get in those drier years, they make a call for water supply releases, and we have to release from our 11 system reservoirs. And so you can see that's what these are. These are the total volumes of water released in these years, and they correlate with each other. So you got the 2007, 2008, you can see they move all the way down. And so if you just kind of sit back and look at it, you can see an obvious correlation here. So during years where we have minimal releases out of our 3 reservoirs during April and May, at some point in the year, we're going to have water supply releases for our large lower basin customers. So 2009, relatively low release volume out of those 3 reservoirs we had here. And then 2011 through 2014, same thing. 2018, 2020, 22, and 23. The one exception was last year. 2024, we had a substantial amount of releases in the spring like we did this year. But we did have some water supply releases, and that was due to, we really had a drier latter half of 2024. We didn't get the October rains that we normally see. And so we did have a small amount of releases towards the end of the year last year.
Before you go on, let me just, I want to make sure I clarify so that people understand. We do two types of releases. We do a release when we have excess water.
Yeah.
And then we do releases for our customers that are downstream that are not getting enough water. So basically the top one is when we have a lot of rainfall and we have to release in order to evacuate out of our reservoirs and pass through what's coming downstream. But the lower graphic then is to show how much water we've had to release in drier times. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
That's exactly right. So, and that's another good way to couch all this to get a perspective of what we're looking here. But anyways, the takeaway from this graphic is that considering that we've had about 1 million acre feet of total volume pass through our 3 reservoirs over the last couple of months, history shows, and that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen, but history shows that we should have a relatively quiet year with respect to downstream water supply releases.
Okay.
So, and just to kind of, so that's kind of like where we've been. Looking forward a little bit, we have upper left, we have this 8 to 14 day precipitation outlook. These are all graphics issued by the Climate Prediction Center. And so the 8 to 14 day up there in the top left shows above normal precipitation through June 18th. And then looking a little bit farther, the 3 to 4 week outlook, which is valid from June 14th to the 27th, is showing also above normal conditions. It's kind of right there along the threshold of the Brazos Basin. And so, and then the longer term, the seasonal precipitation outlook here in the bottom, that shows the conditions through August, so through most of the summer. And you can see that what the Climate Prediction Center is issuing or showing is equal chances for being wet or dry. And typically in Texas, normal conditions is just dry. And so
right.
that's just
normal.
Yeah, that's just normal.
So over the next couple of weeks, we can expect, more rain is what the forecast is looking like, and it's going to slowly dry out.
Yeah, and that's typical of, at some point the rain shuts off. We've had wet summers. I think the 2021 summer was relatively wet. There's been other wet summers. 2007, it was a really wet summer. So just because it's typically dry doesn't mean it's always dry. And so anything goes over the next 3 months. We'll just have to wait and see.
Okay.
And then this is just another way to look at it. This is the U.S. seasonal drought outlook, and it typically correlates directly with precipitation. Lack of precipitation forecasted is going to show drought development, or on the vice versa, more precipitation is going to see drought removal or just no drought. And that's what we're seeing here. This is the Brazos River here, and it's showing no drought. We don't know what's really going to happen. So this is just kind of an indicator of what we could potentially expect. Okay. So, and then this is our final slide here. We've thought this would be appropriate considering last Sunday, which was June 1st, is when we officially entered into hurricane season. It'll go through June 1st all the way through November 30th. And so this graphic we took from the National Hurricane Center, which is under the umbrella of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So they're predicting this pie chart here, the seasonal probability. They're predicting a 60% chance. My mouth is getting dry. I always do this. Sorry, excuse me. A 60% chance of an above normal season, and then a 30% chance of a near normal season, and a 10% chance of a below normal season. So, and then over here on the right, the agency's forecasting a range of 13 to 19 named storms. So those are any storms with winds of at least 39, not 90, scratch that, 39 miles per hour or higher. And so of those 13 to 19, they're saying that 6 or 10 of those could be hurricanes, which are winds of 74 miles per hour or higher. And then of those 6 to 10, 3 to 5 of those could be a category 3, 4, or 5. And those are anything with wind speeds of 111 miles per hour or greater. So overall, NOAA has a 70% confidence level in these ranges. And, you know, since 2015, NOAA's gotten pretty decent at forecasting these hurricane seasons. And they've hit it since about 2015. Like I said, about 80% of the time they get it right. So, which is pretty phenomenal, I think. So, so that concludes.
Yeah, don't go anywhere because I think we actually have a couple of questions. I may ask you a question real quick.
Okay.
Also, if you're everyone should be prepared for hurricane season. You know, we live in a part of the world that we experience those. We don't normally have things come all the way up into the upper part of the basin, but that's a possibility with some hurricanes. So be prepared. We will have an article on our website starting on Monday that talks about hurricane preparedness and what you can do to put together a go box or to be prepared in the event that you might be without electricity or heavy rainfall for a while. Anyway, take a look at our website, brazos.org, on Monday, and there'll be some good information on hurricane preparedness there. But before you walk away, Chris, we did have 2 questions, which is great and unusual. I'm happy to have them. The first one says, do you make accommodation at Lake Granbury based on predicted rainfall or actual rainfall? Either one of you would like to answer that?
So I want to make sure I get the question right. Do we make accommodations at Granbury as far as like flood releases, flood management, based on forecasted rainfall?
It says predicted rainfall or actual. So I can't tell you exactly
okay.
what this person meant by that, but
it sounds like they're just acting, how do we make our decisions? Is it on predicted or actual? And
right.
And the short answer to that, and Peyton, you can come up here and chime in, but the short answer to that is we don't make any decisions on flood control releases based on forecasted rainfall.
Okay.
The water already has to be on the ground, and so when we're operating those gates, we're watching, and Peyton touched on this in his presentation. We are observing the upstream U.S. streamflow gauges, but there's a whole lot of ungauged area. There's a whole lot of rain that could be happening on top of the lake or around the lake or downstream of those gauged areas. And so the only way we can truly tell what the inflows are coming in is to look at the change in elevation over time.
Okay.
And so we do a calculated inflow as we're propagating and working through these flood releases. And so although we're watching rainfall and radars and gauges, we only make decisions based on the water that's on the ground. Now, if there's no rain at Granbury, but there's rain above Granbury and even above PK, and we know there's a 1 gate, 2 gate, 3 gate release at PK, that water's on the ground. So we can make decisions on releases if we know that water is on the ground.
And that's where all of those gauges come into effect that give us an idea of what might be flowing downstream.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So we do not make any decisions based on forecasted rainfall.
Okay.
In a nutshell, yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. The other one I'm not sure that you can answer, but let me read it. It says, there have been posts on Facebook indicating Lake Granbury made the top 10 most polluted lakes in Texas list. So unfortunately, Tiffany's not here to answer that, but I can go to it. So it says, can you respond with what the factual situation is? And can you provide public data on pollutant and bacteria levels relative to human health, specifically for swimmers? Yes, we can address that. So we are very aware that there is an artificial intelligence video that's been roaming around Facebook and Instagram and TikTok showing that Lake Granbury was number 7 on the list of most polluted. And to be entirely honest with you, that is completely false. We looked into all 10 of the lakes that were listed on that video, and the facts are absolutely incorrect. One of the things that it said about Lake Granbury was that there were signs all around the lake warning about bacteria and about a certain type of algae that was unhealthy to the public. And there are not signs like that because there is no background to have warnings of that type out there. So absolutely false. We're not sure where the video originated, except the fact that it's very obviously artificial intelligence produced, and it is factually inaccurate. Now, we do have a program that we've talked about here on Brown Bag in the past. We are Brazos River Authority is part of the of the Texas Clean Rivers program. And we do have factual information on that part of our website that shows regular real-time testing that we do for the state of Texas, that we report then to both the TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and the Environmental Protection Agency on the federal level. And we do not have a pollution problem that was represented in that video. So if you would like to take a look at the Texas Clean Rivers program part of our website, please help yourself, brazos.org, and just click on the button that says environmental. You'll look for another button that says Texas Clean Rivers program that does have all of that data reported. Okay, I do think that's our last question. If from all the things that we've talked about today, you find that you do have additional questions, please feel free to send us an email at information@brazos.org, and we would be happy to answer you in writing. In the meantime, if you have kiddos that would enjoy getting some of those coloring books from us, we are happy to make them available. Summertime is busy, and it's great to be water safe. So we hope you will join us for our next Brown Bag on the Brazos, which will be in August, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for joining us today.